We've got to stop meeting like this. By which I mean I need to get my shit together. Hello beautiful people, my name is Benji, and today, perhaps unsurprisingly given the time of year it is, I'm bringing you the mid-year book freakout tag. This tag has been a staple of the booktube community since long before I joined it. It was created by two channels that I'm pretty sure are kind of defunct now. I'll have them linked in the description box below along with the questions that I'll be using. And in lieu of explaining where I've been and why I've taken yet another small hiatus, I'm just going to get right into it, give you a nice short, simple, and sweet video so that I can continue filming, maybe do a little batching so that the rest of the month and the rest of the year I've just sort of got the ball rolling and I can actually put into booktube the effort that it deserves. So without further ado, here is my mid-year check-in. Question number one is, what is the best book that you've read so far this year? For me, this is a dual answer question, as will be the case for several of these. The first, temporally, of the books that I read that I consider the best of my year was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, perhaps better known for the chokehold he had on all the Tumblr girlies in the early 2010s with books such as Looking for Alaska or The Fault in Our Stars. John Green is also a super popular YouTuber here, one half of the duo called Vlogbrothers. He and his brother Hank do a little bit of everything, and one of the things that John does, I think, particularly well is his podcast, The Anthropocene Reviewed, where he takes specific things, like from something as innocuous as the world's biggest ball of paint to Auld Lang Syne, the song, the thing everybody sings on New Year's, and writes a review of them like you would for like Yelp or something. The book version of The Anthropocene Reviewed is a collection of these sort of ratings that were put together during the middle of the COVID era. So at first when I was reading it, I thought it would be a deeply depressing and like difficult read. A man desperately struggling to find any sort of joy and hope during a deeply hopeless time. And in a way it kind of was that, but I was very happy in that the effect of it wasn't the sorrowful, pitiful looking at somebody struggling by their nails and their teeth to pull themselves into a moment of joy. It was actually a success at bringing that joy to me, of finding the good in the human where it was really, really hard to believe anything good could come out of being human. My second answer for this question is like a pivot in the completely opposite direction, basically. It is a novel called The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajrachandra. I originally picked this book up because it's one of the Hugo nominees, and I am reading all of those so that I can vote effectively prior to Worldcon. And I was incredibly pleasantly surprised by the depth of this speculative fiction story. I've been sort of off in my fantasy reading for a while, reading a lot more like fantasy romance and very sort of almost mind-numbing stuff lately, but this book reminded me of why I love fantasy, why I go absolutely feral for a concept taken and ran with as hard and as fast as an author can, and a world that's just so lovingly built. It was fantastic. I'm a sucker for anything that sort of turns the idea of divinity on its head, and the idea of a city where the spawn of gods are a dime a dozen and prophets and saints are just sort of milling about the regular population but still kind of looked at askance. Beautifully done. I will read anything this author writes. And the third book that I could have chosen for this prompt perhaps better fits question number two, which is, what is the best sequel that you've read this year? And for me, that is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This is book 2 of the Winter Night trilogy. If you've been following my channel this year, then you know that I absolutely adore this series. It follows a girl named Vasya, who is the daughter of a Russian noble way back in the day, like at the dawn of Christianity kind of coming into that region. And Vasya is unique in that she can actually see the pagan spirits that are taking care of her home and her hearth and etc., and watching them sort of weaken and fade as the sort of rising tide of Christianity comes in and the beliefs of the people of the land begin to change. And because of this ability, she has the power to protect these spirits more or less and protect the guardians of her family and her people. But on the other hand, she is a woman in a deeply patriarchal society, and that is a difficult wall to sort of break your head against if you're trying to make any sort of actionable change. And even more so than in book 1, I think that The Girl in the Tower addresses those difficulties, the cruelties of patriarchy that Vasya has to fight against in order to even begin to meet her potential. Also, that's when the romance kicks up, and I really, really enjoy Vasya and Morosko as a couple. They're both deeply fallible, but also deeply sweet, and she carries. I love Vasya. She's a a fantastic protagonist. I really do need to finally finish the series. Question number 3, what is an anticipated new release from this first half of the year that you would like to get to? And I'm a little bit cheating because I actually have already gotten to this book, and it is Twelfth Night by Alexine Farrell Fulmuth, better known as Olivia Blake. Twelfth Night is a sort of Shakespeare retelling done in the style of those like late 90s, early 2000s rom-coms, like She's All That, She's the Man, Clueless, that sort of a thing. But it's modernized and brought into the 21st century in a way that is just so deft and brilliant. The story follows Jack the Duke Orsino, a football player who had an ACL injury, who, to relieve his boredom and his just inability to do the one thing that he absolutely loves, delves into this online game called Twelfth Night. There he begins to interact with Viola Reyes, a angry, deeply nerdy girl who thinks that Jack has had everything in his life handed to him, including the class presidency, for which she is the vice president. The two of them in real life do not get along, so what makes it different in the world of Twelfth Night? Well, Jack thinks that Viola is in fact her own twin brother, and Viola, despite knowing Jack is who he is in Twelfth Night and in real life the entire time, finds herself beginning to empathize with this boy who up until that point she has kind of loathed. And it's just such a good story. I think that Fulmuth did a really great job of making it modern and yet still believable. It's very much a story that wants to be a YA story, given the miscommunication necessary at the crux of it to make it work. It's queerer, more diverse, and overall just more aware with the mores and cultural values and like the zeitgeist of the times, but it's still very much at its heart the comedy of errors that Shakespeare's Twelfth Night was, and I think that the combination just worked beautifully. This book came out on May the 28th of this year, so it still definitely counts for the first half of the year. I will have links where you can purchase it linked in the description box below because I love it and I think you will too. But as far as books that I can't have gotten to already and thus I cannot cheat the question out of, question number 4 is as follows. What is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year, so July through December of 2024? I have, again, 2 answers for this, one which is coming out relatively soon and one which I will have to wait till the end of the year for. The first of these books is The Suffering Game, the most recent arc and the most recent installation of the Adventure Zone graphic novelization. The Adventure Zone is one of my favorite Dungeons & Dragons live play podcasts. I've been following it for quite a while at this point, and the first arc that they ever did, the sort of lightning in a bottle that was the Adventure Zone balance, was popular enough that they decided to make a graphic novel version of it. And because I like to own tangible versions of the media that I really enjoy, this is as close as I can get to actually like owning a hard copy of the podcast. And further down the line of this year, I cannot wait to read The Whispering Night, which is book 3, and I believe the conclusion of Susan Dennard's The Luminaries series. Like the Winter Night trilogy that has sort of taken over my reading this year, The Luminaries is a series that has taken over this year, and then also like half of 2019 when it first came out as a sort of Twitter choose your own adventure story that Susan Dennard was doing. As I say every time I talk about the series, I can't be normal about The Luminaries because to me, I feel like I've been there since its inception as like a story that was shared with a public. I've really enjoyed the ways that Susan Dennard has expanded upon the premise that she introduced in this really short form kind of collaborative storytelling that she did all these years back at this point. And it's been really gratifying to watch the story grow and watch these characters who I thought I knew and who I had some semblance of control over alongside, I don't know, the many hundreds of thousands of people who are also playing along in the Choose Your Own Adventure. It's so like interesting and gratifying to see them grow and develop more depth and interact with one another in ways that were not able to be explored in the sort of original iteration of the story. I'm very excited to see how it's going to conclude. There's a lot of moving parts, as is always the case for a Susan Dennard book, but I feel like because she writes so cinematic and fast-paced and in just a way that captivates me dearly, this is one of those books that I will pick up and read through like within an hour of getting it. I cannot wait. Question number 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment of the year? What is the most disappointing read? And unfortunately, I have 2 again. Well, okay, I suppose it depends on how you classify a disappointment. On the one hand, a disappointment could be a book that just was not there in many ways, that failed you in terms of how the characterization was going, the way that the plot was presented, etc. But you didn't necessarily have big expectations about it to begin with. It just failed on many craft levels for you. If that were the case, then the book that I would choose for this prompt is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. It's one of those things I wish I could have championed. And on paper, it ticks many of my boxes for any sort of a contemporary story. It follows a sort of quarter to midlife crisis protagonist who is just having a lot of trouble dealing with the latest transition in her life, and it centers a queer love story. And I feel like sapphic fiction is often given the shortest end of the stick. So that one definitely could qualify, but what I think is perhaps even more disappointing is when you convince yourself that you're absolutely going to love something that not only does it tick all of your boxes in terms of the types of stories that you like to read, but that the comp titles for it are phenomenal, the aesthetics for it are brilliant, you really like the author's social media presence, and any engagements you've had with her have been phenomenal, and you genuinely believed from like the snippets that you'd seen of this that it was going to be just this mind-blowing, sort of like life-changing book, like one of those instant favorites that when you read it, you're like, oh, there's a piece of me, a piece of my heart that was missing, and in reading and completing the story, I've found that piece and I get to slot it in here and keep it there forever until I die. And then when you pick it up and read it, you're like, oh no, oh no. And he's saying, oh no, because you lied to yourself. You ultimately lied to yourself. It doesn't matter. The book is pretty damn good, like 3.5 stars quality. It doesn't matter that you are enjoying the romance. It doesn't matter that the aesthetics are still lovely. And perhaps if you could like squint your eyes and pretend that it wasn't written for the same people who think Taylor Swift is the greatest lyricist of our generation when Kendrick Lamar is right there, like maybe you could love it more. But because you set your standards sky friggin' high, it just doesn't quite hit the same way that you hoped and prayed and truly in the core of your soul believed it did. That might be more disappointing. And so it is with heavy heart that I have to say that The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields falls under this category for me. And it's not really through any fault of its own. This is mainly a me problem. It's because I hyped it so much, and it's such a damn shame, because if I was like 50% more chill about this book, easily this could have been like, oh yeah, hell yeah, this is a great read. Like, yes, I have some issues with its pacing. Yes, I have a little bit of issues with its characterization, but ultimately this is stuff that I can get around, and whatever problems I have with the prose, again, I can just sort of hand wave that because that's not the point of the story. But I had such high hopes, and then I dashed them. And that's the problem. That's the problem with putting something up on a pedestal, is that it has a far longer way to fall if, for whatever reason, it doesn't balance very well up there. So it's my damn fault. And I'm very disappointed about it, but mainly I'm disappointed in myself. We follow that up with question number 6. What is your biggest surprise of the year? And for me, this has to be a book that I sort of had the reverse experience with, where I fully expected it to be middle of the road and just fine. And then I ended up reading it in one night because I enjoyed it so much. And that is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. It's weird and it's crazy and it's a very short book, but it's just a phenomenal piece of science fiction. I just really, really fucking enjoyed it. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. I set myself up for success by having sort of very low expectations, and I ended up adoring it. I'll link my sci-fi reading vlog in the description box below, because sort of seeing me react to it live as I read it might kind of convey what I'm feeling about it better than I'm doing now. But yeah, big ol' shock for me, liking that book as much as I did. I had no idea what to expect with it, and that, I guess, is why it's such a surprise. Words mean things, and that's what a surprise is. Jesus Christ. Question number 7 is, who is your favorite new author or new to you author? For me, I'm doing the new to me author because I hadn't read anything by either of these people prior, and then the books that I read by these folks this year have cemented them as like auto read authors for me. And that is S.T. Gibson, author of A Dowry of Blood, and T. Kingfisher, author of Thornhenge. Both of these are little novellas. The S.T. Gibson work, A Dowry of Blood, is a sort of sapphic queer retelling of the story of Dracula's wives as they sort of take agency over this person who has claimed and confined them. This is the book for the Astarian girlies of the Baldur's Gate 3 fandom. I implore you to read it if you haven't already, though I'm sure you have. And Thornhenge is one of the novellas that was nominated for the Hugos this year, so I read it, like The Saint of Bright Doors, truly just as a matter of rote to make sure that I read all of the things so I could most accurately cast my votes for my best ones of the year, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It is a sort of retelling or reimagining of the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty. This novella follows a young girl named Toadling, who is a human changeling, so the human baby that was stolen and raised by the fairies, keeping watch and keeping guard of Sleeping Beauty in her tower and making sure that no prince goes inside to wake her up. I think it is a delightful twist on the fairy tale while still very much being in keeping with the genre of fairy tales, but also turning a lot of their tropes on their head. The idea of beauty equating to morality and the idea of masculinity looking only one certain type of way. Phenomenal work all around, T. Kingfisher. I will be reading just about everything you write from now on. Mwah, loved it. Question number 8 is, who is your newest favorite character? And I'm a little bit cheating for this one, but hear me out. The amount of change that happened to this character between the previous book and this installation of the series is so vast that I feel like they basically are a new person, and that is Mosscap from Becky Chambers' A Prayer for the Crown Shy. This also happens to be the answer to question number 9, what is a book that made you cry this year? Becky Chambers writes hope punk that hits me right here in my cold dead heart. She writes for the girls, the gays, the theys, the neurodivergent girlies, for anybody who feels like maybe they are not necessarily to be a part of this world, and she lets you know, like, who cares? Even if you're not, who gives a shit? It's nice to be here, and I'm glad you are here. And that's how her books make me feel, even when I am spiraling and panicking. And Mosscap, especially as a character, does that a lot for me. To be so kind and so excited by everything the world has to offer, and sort of untouched by a certain type of cynicism, but sort of learning about it through osmosis anyway, is really important to me. Mosscap is good, and I'm really glad that Mosscap has good friends that love it, because if it didn't, everything would be bad. Also, I truly can only aspire to the level of drama of knowing that one of your pieces has broken inside of you, one of the ones that's not necessarily necessary for your function, but definitely an important one in the build of you, and just being like, well, I've begun to degrade, my body has begun to fade, I guess I'll die. And speaking as a person who is like not quite like reaching the age where if I sleep with my head tilted wrong, my neck will hurt in such a way that I feel like I'm dying, and that'll last for the next 3 days, but who has definitely like seen a lot of their friends go through that stage and is like very aware that it's coming for them. Like that, it's for the quarter life crisis girlies. I love Becky Chambers. I love this series, and Mosscap is so good. I gotta stop. I will wax. This isn't even waxing poetic is the problem. The problem is that everything I have to say about this makes me so deeply emotional that I either have to get corny about it or get so sentimental that I'll cry again on camera, and I'm not doing that. Not for free 99, not on Lana Del Rey's internet. So we're moving on. We're answering question number 10, which is, what is a book that made you happy? It's A Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is my first Emily Henry book, and I can tell why y'all like her. I'm sold. If all of her books are to this caliber of like character building and then using those built characters who have grown individually and putting them in a romance that just works really well together, I will be reading more of her if the other books are like this. Not only was the romance between Daphne and Miles organic and beautifully built, I really enjoyed that they first began to be friends and that Miles was just deeply invested in making sure that Daphne was okay and that she sort of had a sense of self because her ex-fiance Peter had sort of robbed her of one during their relationship while they were in this town. So not only was their individual dynamic really good, I really enjoyed that both of the protagonists were quite flawed people as well. They had their own issues to work through, and they had to, not only to make the romance work, but to make the rest of their lives work as well. Each of them had a fully complete character arc to go on in addition to their romantic arc, and that just is a delight to me. I do love me a romance where it's very simple and it's just about the sort of love interests getting together, but I think I like it far more when each of them is complex and has to do their own growing. Question number 11 is, what is the most beautiful book that you have added to your collection this year? And for me, it's this huge bind up of the books of Earthsea. There's dragons on the cover. It's a friggin' brick. Underneath this, it is a beautiful cloth bound thing. It doesn't have like any fancy like gold foiling or anything on it, but on the inside of the flap copy, there's more dragons, and it's just really heavy and it feels very well made, and I love it. I think it's the most beautiful book that I've added to my collection this year. If not that, then it's got to be Where Sleeping Girls Lie, because just look at that cover. It's stunning. It's beautiful. Whoever did the graphic design for that, bravo. I'll have your name on the screen somewhere. Just well done. I have no notes. And question number 12 is, what are the books that you have to read by the end of the year? I'm actually going to replace, simply because if I were to try to answer the question of what books do I need to get to before the end of the year, I might like stress myself out. So looking at some stats, the next question I want to answer is, what genre have you read the most of this year? And according to Storygraph, it still happens to be fantasy, which I feel is strange because in my heart of hearts, I thought it would be romance. And that's probably because of the romance that I read. A lot of it is like crossover genre-wise. So it's like historical romance or fantasy romance or sci-fi romance. So it's not like romance primary. Whereas the fantasy books that I read, while many of them lately have been fantasy romance, I have still read some just pure fantasy books as well. And I think that is the only thing that kind of keeps it in the front running. But it leads me into the question that I think was sort of the most interesting, which is, do you feel that your reading tastes have changed or shifted this year? And the answer is yes and, or no but. Yes, in that I feel that because everything is so chaotic in my life right now, I am very much turning to reading more as an escapist thing than a thing that I do for the pleasure of like having my mind transported into a new world and sort of giving myself as enriching and thoughtful an experience as possible. And I'm very much taking that, the things that I really love about reading, specifically about reading speculative fiction, the sort of thoughtfulness and the what-ifery is just, it's too hard for me to do right now, but I still want to be reading because I love reading as an act as well. The idea of taking words that are on a page and turning them into a reality in my mind. The bits of our brain that encode story and the bits of our brain that encode memory are the same bits of your brain. So in a very real way, when you read, you are kind of living the life that you are reading about. And my life that I am living now, the bits that are encoding memory proper, are just so exhausting and so complicated that I can't add additional complication to that by reading sort of more complicated things, more thoughtful and immersive fantasy stuff. I need it to be light. I need it to be, will these two characters get together and oh look, the world is also fantastical and trapping, rather than look at the difficulty of the implications of what it means to be the child of a saint in a world where saints' children are a dime a dozen, but you are still looked down upon and ostracized because the saint hasn't claimed you. That's lovely. That's wonderful. And my favorite books of the year are still the ones that give me that sort of a thing. I just have less space in my life and in my heart to devote to those things right now, which is quite sad. So suppose that's less a change or a shift in my tastes as it is a change and a shift in what I need reading to do for me right now, which is to entertain and relax me rather than provoke in me deep and difficult sometimes thought. So that's the yes and. I suppose the no but is, I think that your tastes change and shift with every book that you pick up, unless you're rereading the same book over and over again. And if you're doing that, please stop, you absolute maniac. I'm just kidding. If that brings you joy, do whatever. I'm not the police, thank God. I'm not your mom. I'm not here to like yuck your yum. If that's what makes you happy, go ahead and do it. But I really do think that every new thing that you pick up sort of shapes the thing that you will pick up next. So there is sort of an eternal shifting of what your taste is and what your preferences are going to be like. If my reading tastes are a short line, they are not cliffs that are sort of strong and that water has to break against. It's more like a sandy beach where, depending on the tides and the currents and what season it is and where the moon is in its cycle, the shoreline proper is going to shift and change and take new shape, truly with every single wave. And in this metaphor that's gotten away from me, the waves are books. I hope that's obvious. So yes, and in that I'm making conscious choices to keep reading fun and good for me while everything else is sort of in a tumult. And no but in that it's always sort of been like this, where whatever is going on in my life and whatever I have read previously is going to inform the next thing that I pick up. So yes, it's shifted and that's intentional, but no, it hasn't shifted because it's always sort of been like this, but that's not a bad thing. And the final additional question that I wanted to get to is, if you have made reading goals for this year, how have they been going? And to summarize it in one word, they've been going pretty bad. My goal was not necessarily to get to TBR 0 because that would have been friggin' insane given the number of unread books that I own, but I did want to make a solid dent in my owned TBR, getting that number down. I have had a lot of trouble lately, even picking up a physical book, and the audiobooks that were available at the time that I sort of needed them have not necessarily been one-to-one with the books that are the ones that are on my shelf. I've been picking up the things that I think are going to maximize my happiness and my joy, and that has been serving me crazy well. You will see in my June wrap up, which is coming pretty soon, using that method of just sort of letting reading guide where it wants to go has made this past month the highest volume and some of the highest enjoyment of my reading months of this past year. And it got me thinking, like, should I just absolutely eschew these goals? And the ultimate answer that I've come to that question is no. Like, I still want to have the goals, but also I don't want to have the pressure to actually fulfill them. Reading is a hobby, and this should be a thing that I enjoy. Talking about books should be a thing that I enjoy, not a chore that I feel that I need to do or else I've failed. And I worry that given how everything else is going right now, if I try to be more strict with those goals, I'm just going to ruin it for myself, send myself into a slump, and then disappear from BookTube for another year. And that's not a thing I want to do. I like this community. I like being here. So I'm going to just sort of shelf the goals for now. If by doing that, I actually do a better job of completing those goals, I will be not at all surprised. That's sort of how my terrible pathological demand avoidance brain works. But if not, I'm going to try to divorce myself from any feelings of guilt about it, because again, I'm still having fun with this, even though I'm absolutely eating it when it comes to the goals. And ultimately, isn't that the point of all this, is to have fun and enjoy yourself? I think it is. And that is what I'm going to be doing. And that, happy note, is where I'm going to end this video and end the mid-year book freakout tag. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, and I actually will hold me to that. And I would love to have you join my little bookish family. Comment down below with a link to your own version of the mid-year book freakout tag if you've done it, because it's one of my favorite videos to watch during this time of year. Or if that is too much and leaving a comment is more than you are ready for, that is totally fine. Please leave me a mind blown emoji in the comments below to let me know you got to the end of it, because I am mind blown that the year is already half finished. Like, I feel like we just started. Regardless, that is it from me. Thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you at the next one very, very soon. Goodbye.